Sarah Matheson clutched her husband's arm as their carriage approached the looming Victorian mansion. The October wind whistled through the bare branches of oak trees that lined the long driveway to Whitaker Estate. Kentucky's rolling hills stretched behind the property, painted in autumn reds and golds, but the beauty did little to calm her nerves. "James, I don't understand why we couldn't stay in Louisville," she whispered, pulling her wool coat tighter around her shoulders. "This place is so isolated." James Matheson, a journalist for the Louisville Courier, offered his wife a reassuring smile. "The editor wants a full profile on the Whitaker family history. 3 days, that's all we need. Besides, they're paying handsomely for the exclusive." The mansion grew larger as they approached 3 stories of weathered red brick with black shutters, dormer windows jutting from the slate roof like watchful eyes. A wraparound porch circled the first floor, its white paint peeling in places. Despite its grandeur, the house carried an unmistakable air of neglect. Their driver, a local man who'd barely spoken during the 2-hour journey from Louisville, pulled the horses to a stop at the front steps. "Whitaker Place," he mumbled, not meeting their eyes. "I'll be back for you on Sunday, as arranged." Before Sarah could respond, the front door swung open. A tall, severe-looking woman in her 60s stood in the doorway, dressed entirely in black despite the 5 years that had passed since the Civil War's end. Her silver hair was pulled into a tight bun, emphasizing sharp cheekbones and piercing gray eyes. "Mrs. Whitaker," James said, helping Sarah from the carriage before extending his hand. "I'm James Matheson from the Courier, and this is my wife, Sarah. Thank you for agreeing to this interview." Eleanor Whitaker regarded his outstretched hand for a moment before taking it briefly. "You're late. We expected you by 4. Her voice was surprisingly gentle, contradicting her stern appearance. "Dinner will be served at 6 precisely. Abigail will show you to your room." As if summoned, a young maid appeared beside Mrs. Whitaker. She couldn't have been more than 16, with strawberry blonde hair tucked beneath a white cap. "Please follow me, sir, ma'am," she said, eyes downcast. Sarah glanced back as their driver hurriedly turned the carriage around, the horses seemingly eager to leave. The sound of wheels on gravel faded quickly, replaced by the rustling of dead leaves across the vast front lawn. Inside, the house was as grand as its exterior suggested: mahogany, paneling, Persian rugs, and oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors. Yet despite a fire burning in the entrance hall's massive stone hearth, a peculiar chill permeated the air. "The Whitakers have owned this land since 1812, Abigail explained as she led them up a sweeping staircase. "The family made their fortune in coal." "And how many family members reside here now?" James asked, notebook already in hand. Abigail hesitated. "Just Mrs. Whitaker and Mr. Charles, her son. And the staff, of course." "I thought the Whitakers were known for their large family," James pressed. "Wasn't there mention of several children?" The maid's shoulders stiffened. "Here's your room," she said, stopping abruptly before a heavy oak door. "You have 1 hour before dinner. Mrs. Whitaker insists on punctuality." As Abigail hurried away, Sarah entered their assigned bedroom. Despite the dusty rose wallpaper and 4-poster bed draped in burgundy velvet, the room felt oppressive. A single window overlooked the back of the property, an overgrown garden, a small family cemetery in the distance, and beyond that, the edge of dense woods. "James," Sarah whispered, "did you notice?" "No children's laughter. No toys. Nothing to suggest children live here." "That's part of what I'm investigating," James replied, unpacking his notepad. 7 Whitaker children have disappeared over 3 generations. Always from the same bedroom, always after dinner. He pointed to a door connecting to a smaller room. "That one." The dining room of Whitaker Estate reflected the family's past glory, a massive mahogany table that could seat 20. Crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light across sterling silver place settings, and heavy velvet drapes framing tall windows that looked out onto the now darkening grounds. Yet only 4 places were set, clustered at one end of the table. Sarah smoothed her navy blue dinner dress nervously as a grandfather clock in the hall struck 6. The somber chimes echoed through the house, and precisely as the final tone faded, Eleanor Whitaker entered, followed by a man Sarah presumed was Charles. "Mr. and Mrs. Matheson," Eleanor nodded. "My son, Charles Whitaker." Charles was tall like his mother, perhaps 40, with a thick mustache and deep-set eyes that darted nervously around the room. His handshake was clammy, his smile forced. "Welcome to our home," he said, voice barely above a whisper. As they took their seats, Sarah noticed a slight tremor in Charles's hands. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, ramrod straight, her eyes occasionally drifting to the empty chairs that lined both sides of the long table. "Mrs. Whitaker," James began once the first course. A clear soup that tasted faintly of turnips was served. I understand your family has been prominent in Kentucky society for generations. Indeed, Eleanor replied. My husband's grandfather established our coal interests. At one time, Whitaker mines employed half the men in this county. And your husband? James prompted. Edgar passed in '67. Pneumonia. Her tone suggested the topic was closed. The meal progressed through roast pheasant and vegetables from the estate's garden. Charles barely spoke, focusing intently on his plate, occasionally glancing toward the ceiling as if listening for something. Sarah followed his gaze but heard nothing beyond the clink of silverware and the distant moan of wind through the eaves. I understand the Whitaker family was once larger, James ventured, setting down his fork. Your family history mentions several children. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Eleanor's knife scraped against fine china with a sound that made Sarah wince. We've had our share of tragedy, Eleanor finally said. Like many families. 7 children over 3 generations, James pressed gently. All disappeared from the same bedroom. The last being your daughter, Virginia, in 1868. Would you care to comment on these events? Charles's fork clattered to his plate. Mother, I told you this was a mistake, he hissed. Eleanor silenced him with a glance. Mr. Matheson, those are family matters. I agreed to discuss the Whitaker legacy in coal and our contributions to Kentucky's development. Nothing more. Sarah, sensing the tension, attempted to redirect. This house is remarkable, Mrs. Whitaker. Has it always been in your family? Edgar built it in 1845 after our marriage, Eleanor replied stiffly. We raised our children here. Children? Sarah inquired innocently. How many did you have? Charles abruptly stood, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Excuse me, he mumbled, then hurried from the room. Eleanor watched him go, something like pity crossing her features before her expression hardened again. My son finds certain topics difficult. Charles had 5 siblings once. She dabbed her lips with a linen napkin. Now, shall we move to the parlor for coffee? As they followed Eleanor from the dining room, Sarah glanced back and noticed Abigail and another servant clearing the table with practiced efficiency, avoiding eye contact. Above their heads, Sarah was certain she heard the faintest sound, a child's laugh, quickly muffled. She clutched James's arm. Did you hear that? He squeezed her hand reassuringly but said nothing as they entered the parlor where a fire crackled in another massive hearth. The walls were lined with bookshelves and more family portraits, men with stern expressions, women in formal poses, and occasionally children with solemn faces and eyes that seemed to follow Sarah as she moved through the room. As coffee was served, Sarah noticed a small portrait on the mantel, a beautiful young woman with Charles's deep-set eyes, holding an infant wrapped in a white blanket. Is that Virginia? She asked before she could stop herself. Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as she set down her coffee cup. Yes, with her son Thomas. A moment of silence stretched between them before Eleanor continued. Her voice different now, softer, more vulnerable. She was 17 when she disappeared. Thomas was only 6 months old. And what happened to the baby? James asked gently. Eleanor's gaze fixed on the flickering fire. Charles raises him now. The boy sleeps in Charles's room, never in the children's bedroom. She looked directly at Sarah, then eyes suddenly fierce. Never. Night fell over Whitaker estate like a heavy curtain. Sarah stood at the bedroom window, watching moonlight cast long shadows across the family cemetery. The headstones, some large and ornate, others small and simple, stood in neat rows. But Sarah noticed something odd about their arrangement. James, she called softly to her husband, who was reviewing his notes from dinner. There are no small graves in that cemetery. If 7 children disappeared, wouldn't there be graves? James joined her at the window. Unless they were never found, he replied grimly. That's why the stories about this place have persisted for decades. Children vanish without a trace. No evidence of how they were taken. Sarah shivered. And then why do people believe they disappeared from that room? She nodded toward the adjoining door that led to the small bedroom, supposedly empty, yet locked from the outside with a heavy iron key. Because in each case, the child was put to bed after dinner. The parents or nurses would check on them before retiring for the night, and by morning the children would be gone. Windows still latched from inside, doors locked. No sign of struggle. James ran a hand through his hair. The local authorities investigated each time, but eventually the disappearances were attributed to accidents, runaways, or in one disturbing case, the suggestion that a mother had done away with her own child. That's horrible, Sarah whispered. What's strange is that the disappearances span 3 generations, the first in 1825, the most recent being Virginia in 1868. Different parents, different decades, but always the same room, always children between 6 months and 8 years old. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Sarah and James fell silent as footsteps approached their door, hesitated, then continued past. Sarah exhaled slowly. "This house feels like it's listening," she murmured. James kissed her forehead. "Try to get some sleep. Tomorrow I'll interview Charles and see what I can learn about Virginia's disappearance." Hours later, Sarah woke suddenly, unsure what had disturbed her. James slept soundly beside her, but something had changed in the room. The air felt different, heavier, charged with anticipation. Then she heard it, a child's voice, singing softly. "Ring around the rosy, pocket full of POSIES ... double quotes." The sound seemed to come from behind the locked door to the adjoining bedroom. Sarah sat up, heart pounding. The singing stopped, replaced by the sound of small feet pattering across the floor and childish giggling. "Hello?" Sarah called softly. "Is someone there?" Silence fell immediately. Then came a different sound, scratching at the door, gentle at first, then more insistent. Sarah rose from bed, drawn toward the connecting door despite her fear. The brass knob rattled slightly, as if someone on the other side was trying to turn it. "Who's there?" she whispered, pressing her ear against the wood. "Help us," came a child's voice, so faint Sarah almost thought she'd imagined it. "She's coming." The hallway floorboards creaked again. Footsteps approached, measured, deliberate, stopping outside their bedroom. Sarah backed away from the connecting door as the scratching ceased abruptly. She slipped back into bed beside James, pulling the covers to her chin, heart racing. Through a gap in the bed curtains, she watched as their bedroom door slowly opened. A figure stood in the doorway, too shadowed to identify, but from the height and bearing, Sarah suspected Eleanor Whitaker. The figure remained motionless for several long moments, as if listening or watching before withdrawing. The door closed with a soft click. Sarah lay awake until dawn, listening, but the children's voices didn't return. At breakfast, Eleanor appeared as composed as ever, giving no indication she'd prowled the halls at night. Charles was absent. "My son apologizes for missing breakfast," Eleanor explained, sipping her tea. "He often spends mornings with Thomas in the garden, weather permitting." "I'd love to meet your grandson," Sarah said. "How old is he now?" 7, Eleanor replied, a shadow crossing her face. "He'll be 8 in December." James cleared his throat. "Mrs. Whitaker, I was hoping to see some of your family records today. Photographs, journals, anything that might help illustrate the Whitaker legacy for our readers." Eleanor studied him for a moment. "Abigail will show you to the library after breakfast. Our family papers are kept there. You may review them, but nothing leaves this house." As they finished eating, Sarah ventured, "Mrs. Whitaker, I believe I heard a child last night in the room connected to ours. But I thought you said no one uses that bedroom anymore." Eleanor's teacup clattered against its saucer. "It's quite impossible, Mrs. Matheson. That room has been empty since Virginia disappeared." She stood abruptly. "If you'll excuse me, I have household matters to attend to," as Eleanor left. Abigail entered to clear the breakfast dishes. Sarah noticed the maid's hands trembling slightly. "Abigail," she said gently, "does anyone ever use the bedroom connected to ours?" The girl's face paled. "No, ma'am. Not since Miss Virginia. But I heard singing last night." A child's voice. Abigail glanced nervously toward the doorway. "Sometimes the wind plays tricks in these old houses," she said, her voice barely audible. "Best not to speak of such things." "What happened to Virginia, Abigail?" James pressed. "You must have been here when she disappeared." The maid looked as if she might flee, but instead she leaned closer. "She was put to bed after dinner, like always. Her room connected to her parents', the one you're staying in now. Mr. Edgar checked on her before retiring, said she was sleeping peacefully. By morning she was gone." Abigail's voice dropped even lower. "But what no one talks about is what Miss Virginia said the week before she vanished. She told her mother she'd seen children in her room at night, children who weren't really there. The Whitaker library occupied most of the mansion's east wing floor. 2 ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes, rolling ladders to reach the highest shelves, and tall windows that filled the room with autumn light. A massive oak table dominated the center, its surface scarred with decades of use. "The family records are kept in those cabinets," Abigail explained, pointing to a row of locked filing drawers along one wall. She handed James a small brass key. "Mrs. Whitaker said you may examine anything except the personal correspondence in the red folders." With that, she curtsied slightly and left. James immediately began exploring the cabinets while Sarah wandered the room, running her fingers along book spines and examining framed photographs. One caught her attention, a formal family portrait from what appeared to be the 1850s. Eleanor and Edgar Whitaker sat stiffly, surrounded by 6 children of varying ages. "James, look at this," she called. 6 children, just as Eleanor said. James joined her, notebook in hand. Charles would be the oldest boy here, he said, pointing to a solemn-faced youth of about 12, and that must be Virginia. He indicated a little girl of perhaps 5, with blonde ringlets and a doll clutched in her lap. If Virginia was 17 when she disappeared in 1868, this photograph would be from around 1856, Sarah calculated. What happened to the other 4 children? James returned to the files, pulling out a large ledger labeled Family Chronicle. He flipped through pages of meticulous handwriting, stopping occasionally to make notes. According to this, Edgar and Eleanor had 6 children between 1844 and 1851. Charles was the firstborn, followed by Edgar Jr., William, Virginia, Mary, and Joseph. He continued reading, his expression growing more troubled. Edgar Jr. disappeared in 1857, age 11. The chronicle simply states, taken from the children's bedroom after dinner. William vanished in 1861, age 13. Mary in 1863, age 10. Joseph in 1866, age 15. 4 children from the same family? Sarah whispered, horrified. And then Virginia in 1868? That's 5 of their 6 children. Only Charles survived. Each disappearance is noted identically, taken from the children's bedroom after dinner. No elaboration, no explanation. James flipped back through earlier pages. The same phrasing is used for Jonathan Whitaker in 1825 and Catherine Whitaker in 1847. He looked up at Sarah. 7 children over 3 generations, all from the same room. Sarah shivered despite the sunlight streaming through the windows. But why would they continue to use that bedroom? After the first disappearance, wouldn't they close it off? That's what doesn't make sense, James agreed. Unless a door at the far end of the library opened and Charles Whitaker entered, holding the hand of a small boy. The child Thomas had Virginia's blonde curls and Charles's deep-set eyes. He regarded the strangers curiously, but remained half-hidden behind his uncle's legs. "I see you've found our family history," Charles said, his voice steadier than it had been the previous evening. "Not the most cheerful reading, I'm afraid." James closed the ledger. "Mr. Whitaker, I'm trying to understand why, after so many tragedies, your family continued to use that particular bedroom." Charles guided Thomas to a small desk in the corner with a picture book before answering. "You assume we had a choice, Mr. Matheson." His voice was low, ensuring the boy couldn't hear. "My father tried boarding up that room after Edgar Jr. disappeared. Within a week, the boards were torn away from the inside. When William was moved to a different bedroom in another wing, he sleepwalked back to the children's room every night until Charles swallowed hard. After the 3rd child, my parents sought help, priests, doctors, even a woman from New Orleans who claimed to communicate with spirits. Nothing worked. The room wants children. Eventually, my mother accepted that fighting it only hastened the inevitable." "Are you saying the room itself took your siblings?" Sarah asked incredulously. Charles's eyes darted to Thomas, then back. "Not the room. What's in the room?" "What's been there since my grandfather built this house on land that should have remained untouched." He lowered his voice further. "The locals, the indigenous people who lived here before white settlers arrived, they avoided this hill, called it the hungry place." "Mr. Whitaker," James began carefully, "are you suggesting something supernatural?" Charles laughed bitterly. "Supernatural? No. Just older than us, hungrier than us, and patient enough to wait for what it wants." He moved toward Thomas as if suddenly anxious to remove the boy from their presence. "Thomas never sleeps in that room. He stays with me, always. I've broken the pattern." As Charles ushered the child toward the door, Sarah called after him. "Mr. Whitaker, why did your mother agree to this interview if she wanted to keep these disappearances private?" Charles paused, his hand protectively on Thomas's shoulder. "Because last month, Thomas started talking about children in his dreams. Children who want him to join them in the special room. Fear etched deep lines around his mouth. Mother thought perhaps making the story public might, I don't know, change something. Break the cycle." After they left, Sarah and James exchanged troubled glances. "He can't possibly believe some supernatural force took those children," Sarah whispered. James reopened the family chronicle, turning to entries from the 1820s. Edgar Whitaker Sr. acquired this land in 1820 from the Shawnee, through means described as duplicitous even by the standards of the time. Construction began in 1822. He continued reading. "There's a note here about workers refusing to dig the foundation after uncovering what they called a door in the earth. What does that mean?" "It doesn't say." "Just that," Edgar Sr. insisted. "Construction continue, offering double wages." James flipped forward several pages. 3 years after the house was completed, Edgar Sr.'s youngest son, Jonathan, became the first to disappear. Sarah moved to the window, looking out over the rolling Kentucky hills. James, what if there's a logical explanation? Secret passages, hidden rooms, something that would allow someone to enter that bedroom unseen. James nodded thoughtfully. And we should examine the room more closely. If children have been disappearing for generations, there must be physical evidence, a mechanism, a hidden entrance, something real. As they prepared to leave the library, Sarah noticed a small red folder tucked beneath the larger ledgers, the personal correspondence they'd been instructed not to read. Glancing toward the door to ensure they were alone, she slipped the folder into her skirt pocket. That afternoon, with Eleanor occupied in town and Charles taking Thomas for a ride around the estate, James and Sarah finally had an opportunity to examine the locked bedroom. Abigail, growing increasingly nervous about their questions, had disappeared into the servants' quarters, leaving them temporarily unsupervised. James produced a set of slender metal tools from his luggage. Lockpicking, he explained, seeing Sarah's surprised expression. A useful skill for investigative journalism. The heavy iron lock resisted at first, but eventually yielded with a reluctant click. The door swung open with a low creak, revealing a room that appeared frozen in time. Unlike the faded elegance of the rest of the house, the children's bedroom looked recently inhabited. A small bed with crisp white linen stood against one wall. Beside it, a wooden rocking horse, its painted eyes eerily lifelike. Dolls and tin soldiers were arranged on shelves. A child-sized desk held paper and colorful pencils, and a wardrobe stood partially open, revealing small dresses and suits hanging in perfect order. "This can't be right," Sarah whispered, stepping cautiously into the room. "Virginia disappeared 7 years ago, yet everything looks ready, as if expecting a child to return any moment." James moved methodically around the room, tapping walls, examining floorboards, peering behind furniture. "Someone maintains this room," he agreed, "but I don't see any obvious hidden entrances." The room had 2 windows, both locked from inside with heavy iron latches. The glass was thick and wavy with age, offering a view of the family cemetery and beyond it, the dense woods. No tree branches came close enough to provide access from outside. Sarah opened the wardrobe fully, running her hands along its back panel. Nothing here. She moved to the small desk, opening its single drawer. Inside lay a child's diary, its pages filled with careful handwriting. "James, look at this." The diary belonged to Virginia Whitaker. Its final entry dated November 14th, 1860, 3 days before her disappearance. Sarah read aloud. "The children came again last night. They stand around my bed and watch me with their hollow eyes. They want me to follow them somewhere, but I'm afraid. Mother says I'm having nightmares, but I'm not asleep when they come. Thomas cries when I bring him into this room. I think he sees them too. Father says I'm too old for such fancies. Only Charles believes me." James continued examining the room, now focusing on the stone fireplace. The chimney could provide access, but it's too narrow for an adult. He stuck his head into the firebox, looking up the sooty shaft. "It's been blocked off. There's a metal grate about 4 feet up." Sarah moved to the bed, kneeling to check underneath. Finding nothing, she sat on the edge, the mattress sinking slightly beneath her weight. As she shifted, something crinkled beneath the pillow. Lifting it, she found a folded piece of paper, not yellowed with age like Virginia's diary, but crisp and new. She unfolded it to reveal a child's drawing in colored pencil. It showed stick figures, many small ones with hollow circles for eyes surrounding a larger figure labeled Thomas in childish scrawl. In the background was a crude representation of a door set into what appeared to be a mound or hill. "James," she called, her voice shaking. "This drawing is recent. Look at the name." James examined the paper. It could be Thomas's drawing. Charles mentioned he's been dreaming about children calling him to the room. But how did it get here? Charles said Thomas never enters this room. Sarah's gaze fell on the window overlooking the family cemetery. Unless... A floorboard creaked behind them. Sarah turned to find Eleanor Whitaker standing in the doorway, her face ashen. "I expressly forbade anyone from entering this room," she said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "You have violated my hospitality and my trust." James stepped forward. "It's Mrs. Whitaker. We're trying to understand what happened to your children. 7 disappearances can't be coincidence or bad luck." "You know nothing," Eleanor hissed. "Nothing of what this family has endured, what we've sacrificed." "Then tell us," Sarah implored, rising from the bed. "Your son believes something took your children, something connected to this land. Is that true?" Eleanor's composure cracked. For a moment she looked not like the formidable matriarch, but like a mother who had lost 5 children, exhausted, haunted, desperate. "What would you have me say?" "That my husband's grandfather made a bargain he didn't understand. That we've paid the price for generations." "What kind of bargain?" James pressed. Eleanor's gaze drifted to the window, to the cemetery beyond. Edgar Sr. wanted wealth, power, prosperity for his descendants. The coal seams on this land made him rich beyond imagination. But wealth always has a cost. Her eyes returned to them, suddenly sharp. Every 21 years it takes a child. Jonathan in 1825, Catherine in 1847, but something changed. The hunger grew. After Edgar Jr. in 1857, it began taking more frequently. You're saying some entity has been taking your family's children for 100 years. Sarah couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. Why not leave? Abandon this place. We tried. Eleanor's voice rose. After William disappeared, Edgar moved us to Louisville for a year. But the children, our neighbors' children, began having nightmares. Sleepwalking, speaking of hollow-eyed figures calling them. We returned to spare them. James shook his head. Mrs. Whitaker, with all due respect, there must be a rational explanation. Child disappearances spanning a century with no bodies ever found? It defies logic. Logic? Eleanor laughed bitterly. There are older things in this world than your logic, Mr. Matheson. Things that hunger. Things that wait. She straightened, composing herself. You will pack your belongings immediately. Your driver will return you to Louisville today. This interview is concluded. Mrs. Whitaker, James began. Now, she commanded, her authority fully restored, or I shall have the sheriff remove you. As Eleanor turned to leave, Sarah remembered the red folder in her pocket. On impulse, she pulled it out. Before we go, explain this. She extracted a yellowed letter dated 1824, addressed to Edgar Whitaker Sr. from a Shawnee elder. Sarah read aloud, You have broken sacred ground despite our warnings. The door in the earth must remain sealed. What sleeps beneath will wake hungry, and no iron or wood will contain it. It will take from you as you have taken from us, until your line is ended or the door is sealed once more. Eleanor's face drained of color. Where did you get that? What does it mean, Mrs. Whitaker? James demanded. What door? What sleeps beneath this house? Eleanor snatched the letter from Sarah's hand. Get out, she whispered, her voice deadly calm. Before night falls. Eleanor summoned their driver hours ahead of schedule. As Sarah and James reluctantly packed their belongings, Charles appeared at their door, Thomas's small hand clutched in his. You shouldn't leave, he said without preamble. Not before dark. Your mother insists, James replied, closing his suitcase. Charles glanced down the hallway before speaking. You've seen too much. Read too much. It will know. Mr. Whitaker, Sarah said gently. What exactly are you afraid of? Charles knelt to Thomas's level. Go find Abigail. Ask her for a cookie. After the boy scampered off, Charles closed the door. It doesn't just take children from this family. It takes those who know too much, who might reveal its existence. His voice dropped to a whisper. My father didn't die of pneumonia. He threatened to burn this house to the ground after Joseph vanished. 3 days later, they found him in the woods, or what was left of him. Sarah gasped. Are you suggesting your mother lied about his death? She protects the family name, what remains of it, Charles replied bitterly. The Whitaker legacy means everything to her. Mr. Whitaker, James said firmly, no supernatural force has been abducting children from this house for a century. There must be a rational explanation, secret passages, hidden rooms, perhaps even members of your own family. Charles's face hardened. You think I haven't searched? That generations of desperate parents haven't torn this house apart looking for their children. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, another childish drawing similar to the one Sarah had found. Thomas drew this last night. He's never been in that room, yet he knows what they look like. The hollow eyes, the hungry smiles. The drawing showed the same stick figures surrounding Thomas, but this time they were leading him toward a dark oval shape labeled door. What door, Charles? Sarah asked. The letter mentioned a door in the earth. What does that mean? Charles's eyes darted nervously to the window. The original foundation was dug into the hillside. The workers uncovered something, a stone structure older than any European settlement. My grandfather ordered it incorporated into the foundation rather than delay construction. He swallowed hard. The entrance is in the family cemetery, a mausoleum built to hide it. James checked his pocket watch. Our driver will be here any minute. Then I'll show you quickly, Charles decided. You deserve to know the truth, even if Mother forbids it. They followed Charles down the back stairs and out through the kitchen garden. The afternoon sun hung low, casting long shadows across the lawn as they approached the small family cemetery. A dozen headstones stood in neat rows, and behind them, a stone mausoleum, simple structure with a heavy iron door. The Whitaker family crypt, Charles explained, producing a key. My grandfather is interred here, along with my grandmother. The iron door opened with a mournful groan. Inside, the mausoleum was cool and dark. 2 stone sarcophagi occupying most of the space. Charles struck a match, lighting a lantern that hung from a hook on the wall. "Look at the floor," he instructed, directing the lantern's beam downward. In the center of the mausoleum, partially hidden beneath a worn carpet, was a circular stone set into the floor. Symbols were carved around its edge markings, unlike any writing Sarah had ever seen. "The door in the earth," Charles said quietly, "sealed with symbols meant to contain whatever lies beneath. But the seal weakens. Every 21 years at first, then more frequently. It needs payment to remain dormant. You can't possibly believe your family has been sacrificing children to some entity beneath your house," Sarah protested. "Not sacrificing," Charles corrected. "We didn't choose this. But once my grandfather built here, disturbed what should have been left alone, we became bound to it." His hands trembled as he set the lantern down. "My mother believes we can end it by letting it take Thomas, the last Whitaker child, but I won't allow it. I've protected him for 7 years, and I'll continue to protect him." James knelt beside the stone circle, examining the symbols. These appear to be pre-Columbian, similar to Mississippian or Shawnee sacred symbols, but older. A gust of wind extinguished the lantern, plunging them into darkness. In the distance, thunder rumbled as storm clouds gathered over the Kentucky hills. "We should return to the house," Charles urged. "A storm is coming." As they turned to leave, the circular stone shifted just slightly, a minute movement accompanied by the faintest sound of grinding rock. "Did you see that?" Sarah whispered. Charles grabbed her arm. "Don't speak of it, don't acknowledge it. Come quickly." They hurried back toward the house as the first raindrops began to fall. Sarah glanced back once, just in time to see a small figure standing among the headstones, a child in old-fashioned clothes, watching them with hollow eyes. When she blinked, the figure was gone. At the house, their driver waited with the carriage, looking nervous as the storm approached. "We should leave now, sir," he told James. "Roads get treacherous in these hills when it rains." Eleanor stood in the doorway, watching coldly as their luggage was loaded. "I trust you'll honor our privacy, Mr. Matheson, despite the abbreviated interview." "Mrs. Whitaker," James began, "I believe your family may be in danger, but not from what you think. These disappearances—" "Good day, Mr. Matheson," Eleanor interrupted, her tone final. She turned to her son. "Charles, bring Thomas inside now." "The storm is worsening," Eleanor commanded, her eyes never leaving Sarah and James, as if summoned by his grandmother's words. Thomas appeared at the kitchen door, Abigail hovering protectively behind him. The boy looked pale, his eyes wide and unfocused. "They're awake," Thomas said, his voice oddly flat. "They're hungry." Charles rushed to his nephew, scooping him up. "It's just thunder, Thomas. Nothing to be afraid of." The boy shook his head slowly. "Not the thunder. The children under the stone. They want me to play." Eleanor's face hardened. "Take him to your room, Charles. Now." As Charles carried Thomas inside, the boy looked back over his uncle's shoulder, his gaze locking with Sarah's. "They know you've seen the door," he called. "They say you can't leave now." A chill ran through Sarah that had nothing to do with the rain now falling steadily. "James," she whispered, "perhaps we should wait until the storm passes." "Nonsense," their driver interrupted, securing the last of their luggage. "We'll reach the main road before the worst hits. Best to be away from these hills when the lightning starts." Eleanor stepped forward, surprisingly gentle as she took Sarah's hand. "You must go. Now. While you still can." Her voice dropped so only Sarah could hear. "Knows you've seen too much. If you stay after dark, you'll never leave." The contradiction, first ordering them to leave, now warning them of the danger of leaving, left Sarah speechless. James, however, had reached his limit with the Whitakers and their mysteries. "We're going," he announced firmly. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Whitaker, limited though it was. I'll contact you regarding which portions of our interview I intend to publish." Eleanor didn't respond, her attention suddenly fixed on something behind them. Sarah turned to follow her gaze. Through the curtain of rain, she could see the family cemetery and moving among the headstones. Small figures that seemed to flicker in and out of visibility with each lightning flash. Inside, Eleanor ordered, pulling Sarah toward the door. "All of you, now." The driver, having seen whatever Eleanor had, needed no further encouragement. He abandoned the carriage and dashed for the house, nearly knocking James over in his haste. Eleanor slammed the heavy oak door behind them, sliding a thick iron bolt into place. "Mother?" Charles called from the top of the stairs, Thomas still in his arms. "What is it?" "They're in the cemetery," Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Moving in daylight. It's never happened before." Abigail appeared with candles as the lights flickered and died. "Power lines must be down," she murmured, distributing candles to everyone. The storm had turned the late afternoon as dark as evening, rain lashing against the windows in horizontal sheets. "I don't understand," Sarah said. accepting a candle with trembling hands. What did we see in the cemetery? Eleanor moved to the parlor windows, pulling heavy drapes across them. The taken, she said simply. The children who went into the darkness and became part of it. They herald its hunger. This is madness, James protested. Mass hallucination, perhaps, or... A tremendous crash interrupted him as something struck the front door, not the casual knock of a visitor, but the desperate pounding of small fists, dozens of them beating in unison. The sound moved from the door to the windows surrounding the house, a rhythm like a macabre heartbeat. Thomas buried his face in Charles's shoulder. They want me to open the door in the earth, he whimpered. They say we'll all be together again. Charles looked to his mother. The seals, he said urgently, are they still intact? Eleanor's hand went to a silver locket around her neck, something Sarah hadn't noticed before. As long as this remains closed, the binding holds. The pounding intensified, accompanied now by childish voices calling names. William, Mary, Joseph, Virginia. The names of the missing Whitaker children. We need to get to higher ground, Charles decided. The third floor, as they hurried upstairs. Sarah noticed the portraits lining the stairwell, generations of stern-faced Whitakers. In the flickering candlelight, their eyes seemed to follow their ascent, judging, accusing. The third floor was smaller than the lower levels, a series of disused bedrooms and storage spaces. Charles led them to the largest room at the end of the hall, once a nursery, judging by the faded wallpaper with its pattern of dancing animals. Now it held only covered furniture and dust-draped trunks. We'll be safe here until morning, Charles said, setting Thomas down on an old trunk. It never comes in daylight. What exactly is it? James demanded. You keep speaking in riddles and superstitions. If something is threatening your family, something real, we should alert the authorities. Eleanor laughed bitterly. The authorities? We've had sheriffs, detectives, even federal agents investigate over the decades. None could explain the disappearances. None would believe the truth. Which is what exactly? James pressed. Eleanor touched her locket again. There are older powers in this land than most remember. The indigenous peoples knew. That's why they avoided this hill. When my husband's grandfather built here, he disturbed something ancient, something hungry. It offered a bargain prosperity for the family in exchange for ... double quotes, in exchange for children, Sarah finished, horrified. Not initially, Charles interjected. The bargain was for a single child every 21 years. My grandfather didn't understand what he was agreeing to until it was too late. And you've just accepted this? James couldn't hide his disgust. Generation after generation, watching children disappear? You think we haven't tried to fight it? Eleanor snapped. My husband died trying to end this curse. We've consulted every expert, tried every ritual, every prayer. Nothing works. Her voice broke. We tried to leave, but it followed us, threatening children beyond our family. We returned to contain it. Outside, lightning split the sky, briefly illuminating the room through dust-covered windows. In that flash, Sarah caught sight of small handprints on the glass, dozens of them, pressed against the panes from outside, 3 stories above the ground. The pounding continued throughout the house, moving from windows to walls to floorboards, a relentless rhythm that made conversation difficult and sleep impossible. As night fell fully, even the candles seemed affected, their flames guttering despite the absence of drafts. Thomas had finally fallen into fitful sleep in Charles's arms, occasionally murmuring names none of them recognized, perhaps children taken generations ago. Their driver huddled in a corner, rosary beads clutched in trembling hands, while Abigail methodically folded and refolded linens from an old trunk, her practiced movements seemingly the only thing keeping panic at bay. The binding has weakened, Eleanor said suddenly, breaking a long silence. I can feel it. Sarah, who had been sitting beside James on a dusty settee, looked up. The locket said, as long as it remains closed, the binding holds. What's inside it? Eleanor hesitated, then unclasped the silver locket from around her neck. It was larger than Sarah had initially thought, ornately engraved with symbols similar to those on the stone in the mausoleum. Earth from the door, mixed with blood from every generation of Whitakers, she explained. A binding created by a Shawnee elder who took pity on my father-in-law after the first child was taken. It was meant to contain the hunger, limit it to 1 child every 21 years. She traced the symbols with a weathered finger. But the binding weakens with each taking. After Virginia, I knew it would soon fail completely. And then what happens? James asked. His skepticism noticeably diminished after hours of inexplicable phenomena. Charles answered, his voice hollow. It takes not just 1 child, but all. Every child it can reach. The elder warned that if the binding fails completely, Its hunger will spread beyond this hill, beyond this valley. Sarah moved to the window, careful not to touch the glass where small handprints remained visible. Rain still fell heavily, but the cemetery was now clearly visible, illuminated by an unnatural glow that seemed to emanate from the mausoleum itself. The circular stone door lay open, a perfect black void in the earth. The door, she gasped. It's open. Everyone crowded around the window. Even in the darkness, they could see small figures moving in the cemetery, children in clothing from different eras. Their faces indistinct except for hollow eyes that reflected the strange light. Eleanor clutched the locket tightly. The binding is breaking. We have to reseal it, Charles said urgently. Mother, the ritual requires blood freely given by a Whitaker child, Eleanor finished, her gaze drifting to the sleeping Thomas. Earl's arms tightened protectively around his nephew. No, there must be another way. What exactly does the ritual require? James asked, his journalist's mind still searching for logical solutions even as he witnessed the impossible. Eleanor sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of her 60-some years. The binding requires innocence and sacrifice, blood freely given by a Whitaker child at the door itself, combined with earth from below and sealed with the ancient words. She closed her eyes briefly. I've researched alternatives for years. There are none. There must be, Sarah insisted, unwilling to accept that a child's blood was the only solution. The letter we found mentioned the door being sealed once more. How was it sealed originally before your family came here? Eleanor looked surprised, as if this question had never occurred to her. I don't know. The Shawnee elder who created the binding never explained. Then perhaps the answer isn't in your family's records at all, Sarah realized. Perhaps it's in whatever lies beneath that door. Charles shook his head. You can't be suggesting someone go down there. Not someone, James said quietly, understanding his wife's thinking. Someone not of Whitaker blood. Someone it hasn't been promised. Sarah nodded. Us. Absolutely not, Charles protested. No one who's gone through that door has ever returned. No Whitaker has ever returned, Sarah corrected. But we're not Whitakers. And we've seen too much to pretend this isn't happening. She turned to Eleanor. You said it yourself. If the binding fails completely, its hunger will spread beyond this hill. How many more children would be taken then? Eleanor studied Sarah for a long moment. You don't understand what you're offering. What's down there? It isn't something natural. It isn't something human minds are meant to comprehend. I understand enough, Sarah replied firmly. I understand that Thomas deserves a chance to grow up. That the children in the neighboring towns deserve to sleep safely in their beds. James took her hand. We go together or not at all. The decision made, they prepared as best they could. Eleanor provided detailed instructions for the resealing ritual, while Charles retrieved a small leather pouch containing dried herbs and minerals the Shawnee elder had left generations ago. These were meant to protect the person performing the ritual, he explained. They won't stop it, but they might. Confuse it long enough for you to complete the binding. The driver refused to leave the relative safety of the third floor, but Abigail surprised them by volunteering to guide them to the mausoleum. I've served the Whitakers since I was 12, she said simply. I've watched too many children disappear. Armed with candles, the protective herbs, and Eleanor's silver locket, they prepared to descend. As a final precaution, Charles removed a small leather book from his pocket. The elder's words, he explained, pressing it into James's hands. Memorize the sealing incantation. Once you're below, the book might not. Remain what it is. Sarah knelt beside Thomas, still sleeping fitfully on a pile of dusty blankets. We'll come back, she promised, smoothing his blonde curls. And you'll be safe. Eleanor stopped them at the door. If you succeed, get as far from this place as possible. Take Thomas with you. Get him beyond the hills before the sun sets tomorrow. Don't stop. Don't look back. She pressed a small key into Sarah's palm. This opens the strongbox in my bedroom. There's enough money there to start a new life away from here. You're asking us to take your grandson? James asked, stunned. Eleanor's expression was resolute. I'm asking you to save him from his birthright. Charles and I will remain to ensure the binding holds as long as possible, but the Whitaker line must end. It's the only way to truly break the cycle. The journey to the mausoleum was surreal. The rain had stopped, but the air remained heavy with moisture and something else, an electric tension that made the hair on Sarah's arms stand on end. The strange glow emanating from the open door in the earth cast everything in sickly blue-green light. The small figures they had seen from the window were gone, but evidence of their presence remained. Tiny footprints in the mud, childish drawings scratched into headstones. The mausoleum door stood open, the two sarcophagi within undisturbed, despite the gaping hole in the floor where the circular stone had been. This is as far as I go, Abigail whispered, handing James a lantern. May God protect you. Sarah peered into the opening. Stone steps spiraled down into darkness, their edges worn smooth by the passage of countless feet over centuries, perhaps millennia. The strange light pulsed from far below, casting moving shadows that seemed to reach up toward them. "Ready?" James asked, his voice steady despite the fear Sarah knew he must share. She nodded, clutching the silver locket in one hand and the pouch of protective herbs in the other. Together, the descent seemed to take both minutes and hours, the spiral staircase continuing far deeper than should have been possible beneath the Kentucky hills. The air grew increasingly stale, tinged with an odd metallic scent, and the walls changed from worked stone to something older rock carved with symbols that seemed to shift when viewed directly. Finally, the stairs ended in a vast chamber that defied logic or natural explanation. The ceiling arched high above, supported by columns of a black stone veined with the same blue-green light that illuminated the entire space. The floor was smooth obsidian, reflecting their images like a dark mirror, and at the center stood ... Sarah's mind struggled to comprehend what she was seeing. Not an altar, not a statue, but something that seemed to exist in multiple places simultaneously, a tier in reality itself, through which glimpses of somewhere else could be seen. Around this rift the air shimmered and distorted, and the strange light pulsed in rhythm with what might have been a massive alien heartbeat. "The door," James whispered, his voice sounding wrong in the unnatural acoustics of the chamber. Not a door in the earth, but a door through it. As they approached cautiously, Sarah became aware of movement around them, the small figures from above, more solid here, more present. Children of all ages, dressed in clothing spanning centuries, watching with hollow eyes. Among them she recognized faces from the Whitaker family portraits: Virginia, William, Mary, Edgar Jr., Joseph, the taken. They're bound to it, Sarah realized. Not consumed, but ... transformed. James consulted Charles's leather book, but the pages now appeared blank. "The words are gone," he said, panic edging into his voice. "Not gone," came a child's voice behind them. "Just not for your eyes." They turned to find Virginia Whitaker, what had once been Virginia, standing closer than the others. Unlike her siblings, whose forms seemed to flicker and shift, Virginia appeared almost solid, almost human, save for the hollow darkness of her eyes. "You don't belong here," she said, her voice carrying the strange dual quality of both child and something far older. "This isn't your bargain to break. We came to help," Sarah said carefully. To reseal the door, Virginia circled them slowly. The door was sealed before the Whitakers came. Sealed by those who understood its nature, who respected its hunger. She gestured to symbols carved into the floor, older versions of those on the circular stone. They fed it properly, not with innocent blood, but with the blood of those who had lived fully, who came willingly in the winter of their lives. The Shawnee elder, James realized. He knew the original binding, but he gave the Whitakers an incomplete version. He sought to punish them for their theft of sacred land, Virginia confirmed. A binding that would slowly fail, requiring ever more frequent sacrifice until eventually ... until eventually it would break completely, Sarah finished. And what's beyond the door would be free. Virginia's hollow gaze fixed on the silver locket in Sarah's hand. The binding tool. Incomplete, flawed, but still powerful. She reached for it, then jerked her hand back as if burned when the locket swung near her. Sarah understood suddenly. "It's not just earth and blood in here, is it? Something else. Something that holds you here but keeps you separate from what's beyond the door," Virginia hissed, backing away. The other children moved restlessly around the chamber's perimeter, their forms becoming less distinct, more shadow than substance. "We need to complete the original binding," James said urgently. Not the Whitakers' flawed version, but the one that held for centuries before. Sarah studied the symbols carved into the floor, then those on the locket. There were similarities, but also crucial differences. The blood sacrifice was perverted, she realized. It was never meant to be a child. The first sealing required 3 elements, Virginia said, her voice now layered with others, the voices of all the taken children speaking as one. Earth from the door itself. Blood given willingly by one who has seen both birth and death. And a tether, something to anchor the door to this world while keeping it forever closed. "Earth we have," Sarah said, opening the locket to reveal dark soil mixed with dried blood. "And blood ... She looked at James, who nodded grimly and drew his pocketknife. "I've seen birth," he said quietly. "Our son, even if he lived only hours. And I've seen death on the battlefield." He sliced his palm, letting blood drip onto the soil in the locket. "The tether is the key," Virginia said, the other children drawing closer now. "Something of value freely given. Something loved. Sarah thought of Eleanor's words that the binding required innocence and sacrifice. Not a child's blood, but something equally precious. Her hand went to her neck, where a gold locket hung, a gift from James containing a tiny portrait of their infant son, who had lived less than a day. Something loved, she whispered, removing the locket. Something innocent. Without hesitation, she added her own locket to the mixture of earth and blood in the silver Whitaker locket. The moment the gold touched the soil, the pulsing light intensified, and the rift at the chamber's center contracted slightly as if recoiling. The words, James said urgently. We need the sealing words. Virginia and the other children began to back away from them, their forms growing less distinct. The words are in the earth, Virginia said, her voice fading the blood, in the sacrifice. Speak them from your heart. Sarah closed the silver locket around the mixture and approached the rift. The air around it distorted violently, and through the tear, she glimpsed something vast and incomprehensible. Darkness that was not absence of light, but presence of something human eyes were never meant to see. Acting on instinct, she pressed the locket against the edge of the rift and spoke, her voice resonating strangely in the chamber. With earth that remembers, with blood freely given, with love surrendered but never forgotten, I bind you. Return to your sleep beyond the veil. This door is sealed by human will and human sacrifice. It shall remain closed until the hills themselves crumble and the stars fade from the sky. The chamber shuddered. The rift contracted further, the unearthly light intensifying until it was painful to behold. The children, the taken, began to fade, their forms becoming transparent, then mere outlines, then nothing at all. Run, Virginia's voice whispered, now distant and fading. The binding holds, but the chamber falls. Run while the way remains open. The floor beneath them trembled. Cracks appeared in the obsidian surface, spreading rapidly toward the spiral staircase. James grabbed Sarah's hand, and together they fled toward the steps as chunks of ceiling began to collapse behind them. The ascent was a desperate blur of crumbling stone and choking dust. Twice the stairs gave way beneath them, forcing leaps across growing gaps. The strange light faded, replaced by the natural darkness of an underground chamber, their way lit only by James's faltering lantern. After what seemed an eternity, they emerged into the mausoleum, collapsing on the damp earth as the staircase crumbled completely behind them. The circular stone door reappearing and settling into place with a final, definitive thud. The symbols around its edge glowed briefly with a pure white light, then faded to ordinary carved stone. Outside, dawn was breaking over the Kentucky hills, the storm clouds dispersed. The cemetery stood peaceful and ordinary in the early morning light, no trace of the small footprints or childish drawings that had been there hours before. We need to get back to the house, Sarah said once she'd caught her breath. Thomas, the Whitaker mansion, stood silent in the dawn light. The front door remained bolted from inside, forcing James and Sarah to enter through the kitchen. The house felt different, still old, still grand, but lacking the oppressive atmosphere that had pervaded it before. Dust motes danced in sunbeams that streamed through windows no longer covered by heavy drapes. They found Eleanor in the parlor, sitting motionless before a dead fire, the empty chain that had held her locket still around her neck. She looked up as they entered, momentary surprise giving way to understanding. You succeeded, she said simply. I felt the change. The original binding is restored, Sarah explained. It was never meant to require children's blood. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. All these generations. All these children. ... She seemed to age years in moments, the weight of her family's tragic history settling fully upon her. Where are Charles and Thomas? James asked. The third floor. Thomas finally fell into a peaceful sleep just before dawn. Eleanor rose unsteadily. You should take him now while daylight remains. There's a train to Louisville at noon. As they climbed the stairs, Sarah noticed subtle changes throughout the house. The family portraits that had seemed so judgmental now appeared merely solemn, artifacts of a different era. The air smelled fresher, as if windows long sealed had finally been opened. They found Charles keeping vigil beside Thomas, who slept peacefully on a makeshift bed of blankets. Charles looked up, his expression shifting from wariness to wonder as he registered their return. He came back, he whispered. No one ever comes back. The binding is restored, James told him. The original binding from before your family came to this land. It should hold indefinitely. Charles gently brushed hair from Thomas's forehead. He stopped having nightmares just before dawn. Said the children had gone away. Sarah knelt beside the sleeping boy. Your mother wants us to take him away from here, to start a new life somewhere else. Charles nodded slowly. The Whitaker line must end for the binding to remain secure. No more children in this house, ever. He looked around the dusty room that had once been a nursery. Perhaps it's for the best. This place has known too much sorrow. By mid-morning, they were prepared to leave. Eleanor provided money, documents, and instructions for reaching relatives in Boston who knew nothing of the family's darker history but would welcome Thomas as a distant cousin orphaned by tragedy. "What will happen to you and Charles?" Sarah asked as their borrowed carriage was loaded. Eleanor gazed at the house that had been both home and prison to generations of her family. "We'll remain as guardians, ensure no one else disturbs what lies beneath." A ghost of a smile crossed her features. "And perhaps finally we'll open those rooms that have been closed for so long, let in the light." Thomas, now awake and seemingly unburdened by the night's events, explored the carriage with childish enthusiasm. Whatever he remembered of the hollow-eyed children or the door in the earth, he showed no fear of it now. As they prepared to depart, Charles pressed a small parcel into James's hands. "Virginia's diary and the family chronicle. Write the true story, Mr. Matheson. Not as sensation, but as warning. Some doors are meant to remain closed." The journey back to Louisville felt remarkably ordinary after the events of the past days. Thomas alternated between excited chatter about the train journey ahead and peaceful naps against Sarah's shoulder. By sunset, they were in a hotel in Louisville, the Whitaker estate and its secrets miles behind them. That night, as Thomas slept soundly in an adjoining room, James finally opened Virginia's diary to its last pages. The final entry, dated November 17, 1868, the day she disappeared, contained just 3 lines. "They say I must join them now, the door grows weak. Better one more child than all children." Sarah closed the diary gently. "She went willingly," she whispered, "to protect Thomas, to buy time." James nodded, adding the diary to the materials for his article, an article that would tell of old bargains in sacred land, of doors that should remain closed, and the price of ignoring ancient warnings. An article that would ensure the Whitaker tragedy was remembered but never repeated. "Do you think it's truly over?" Sarah asked, gazing out at the Louisville streets where people moved about their normal lives, unaware of what existed in the hills beyond the city. "The binding is stronger now," James replied, "and with no more Whitaker children in that house, perhaps it will hold forever." Sarah's hand went instinctively to her neck, where her gold locket had hung for years. She felt no regret for its sacrifice. "Not all doors can be reopened," she said softly, thinking of their lost son, of Virginia, of all the children taken over generations. "But perhaps some can finally be properly closed." In the adjoining room, Thomas slept peacefully, his dreams now filled with ordinary childish wonders rather than hollow-eyed figures and doors in the earth. Tomorrow would bring a train journey, a new city, a new life free from ancient hungers and generations of misunderstood bargains. Sarah joined James at the window. Outside, the streets of Louisville bustled with late-evening activity, so different from the isolated Whitaker estate. "Sometimes," she mused, "the most frightening stories are those of human misunderstanding, not supernatural horror." "And sometimes," James added, thinking of Eleanor and Charles remaining as guardians of a door now properly sealed, "the bravest act is simply enduring, year after year, protecting others from horrors they'll never know existed." As night fell over Kentucky, the Whitaker estate stood silent on its hill, its windows illuminated for the first time in decades, as if finally exhaling after holding its breath for generations. The family cemetery lay peaceful under moonlight, the mausoleum door firmly closed, the circular stone once again just stone, its binding renewed not by blood unwillingly taken but by love freely given. 1 year later, Boston. 1893, Thomas Whitaker, now Thomas Matthews, raced through the autumn leaves that carpeted the Boston Common, his laughter bright in the crisp October air. Sarah watched from a park bench, smiling as James pretended to struggle keeping up with the energetic 9-year-old. "Not so far, Thomas," she called as the boy neared the pond. They had settled comfortably into their new life. James had published his article about the Whitaker estate, carefully edited to emphasize the historical aspects while obscuring the supernatural elements to considerable acclaim. It had led to a position at the Boston Globe and enough income to provide a modest but comfortable home in a respectable neighborhood. Thomas had adapted remarkably well, his memories of hollow-eyed children and doors in the earth fading like the frightening dreams of early childhood. Occasionally he would grow quiet when passing certain old buildings or mention the whispering children in passing, but such moments grew increasingly rare. Sarah unfolded a letter that had arrived that morning, postmarked from Kentucky. Charles Whitaker wrote monthly, his neat handwriting detailing the mundane management of the estate and careful avoidance of any mention of what lay beneath it. Reading between the lines, Sarah understood that the binding held strong, no disturbances, no children vanishing from their beds. This letter, however, contained news of significance. Eleanor Whitaker had passed away peacefully in her sleep. Mother found the rest that eluded her in life, Charles wrote. I have laid her to rest in the family cemetery, but not in the mausoleum. Never there. The letter continued with practical matters. The legal declaration of Thomas as Charles's heir, though with provisions that the boy never return to the estate. The gradual donation of Whitaker lands to the county for preservation as natural wilderness. Charles's own intention to be the final Whitaker to occupy the house. The binding grows stronger with time, he wrote in closing. Mother believed that with her passing, another link in the chain of obligation was broken. The land remembers its original guardians now, not the bargain my grandfather forced upon it. Perhaps in time, even the name Whitaker will be forgotten in these hills. Sarah folded the letter as James and Thomas returned, the boy's cheeks flushed with exertion and excitement. Mrs. Matthews, Thomas exclaimed, using the name he'd quickly adapted to. Can we visit the harbor tomorrow? James promises to show me the new steamships. Of course, Sarah smiled, tucking the letter away. James caught her eye, a silent question about its contents. She gave a slight nod, all is well, before turning her attention back to Thomas's chatter about ships and oceans and faraway places. That night, after Thomas was asleep, Sarah shared the letter's contents with James in their small parlor. So Eleanor is gone, James mused, stoking the fire. I wonder if she found peace at the end. Charles seems to think so, Sarah replied. And he believes the binding is stronger for it, as if Eleanor's death somehow further severed the connection between what lies beneath the estate and the Whitaker family. James nodded thoughtfully. The original bargain was corrupted, twisted by greed and misunderstanding. Perhaps as the corrupted bloodline fades, the proper balance is restored. Sarah moved to the window, looking out at the Boston street where gas lamps illuminated occasional late-night pedestrians. So different from the isolated Kentucky hills, from ancient doors and hollow-eyed children. Do you ever wonder, she asked softly, what it was? What truly lies beneath that hill? James joined her at the window. I've researched similar accounts from other cultures. Always sacred places, always entities that existed before human memory, always bargains that went wrong. He sighed. Perhaps mysteries are better left unsolved, some doors better left closed. That night, Sarah dreamed of Virginia Whitaker, not the hollow-eyed figure from beneath the hill, but the girl she might have been, playing in autumn leaves, laughing in sunlight. In the dream, Virginia looked directly at her and smiled, a normal human smile of gratitude and release. Sarah woke with tears on her cheeks, but peace in her heart. Outside, the first light of dawn painted the Boston sky in hues of pink and gold. From the adjoining room came the sound of Thomas stirring, beginning another day in his new life, free from ancient hungers and generations of misunderstood bargains. The story of the Whitakers would fade into local Kentucky legend, a tale of disappeared children, of a family's gradual extinction, of a mansion finally left empty among the hills. Few would know the truth of what lay beneath, of the binding renewed not by blood unwillingly taken, but by love freely given. And in a small Boston home, a boy who might have been the last sacrifice slept safely, his dreams filled with steamships and oceans rather than doors in the earth and children with hollow eyes. Some doors, once properly closed, need never be opened again.